Welcome back to the Alex Jones Show on this Thursday, January 29th, 2015. I'm David Knight, your host. We're going to be joined in the next segment, Paul Joseph Watson from the UK. And of course, he had a story out yesterday. The UK government announces a plan to remotely control vehicles. That's something we've been seeing coming for a long time. As a matter of fact, Obama has mandated devices on American cars. And I forget exactly what the time frame is, guys. Maybe you can look that up. But it's only about 5 or 6 years out that we're looking. This is something that is coming. They're selling it as safety, as convenience. You know, you can just get in these cars and they'll drive themselves, and you can just sit back and play on social media or do whatever you want. You don't have to be concerned about driving your car. I think it's a very dangerous thing because it illustrates the continuing movement towards a total control grid of your movements. They're not just concerned with tracking your movements. Of course, we had the report earlier this week about the DEA saying that they, back in 2009, they were going to record everybody's license plates at gun shows. And they said, don't worry, we didn't do that. They probably found a better way to do it, as I mentioned in the last segment. But we also saw this week that the TSA wants to look at your social media posts before they let you fly. They also want to look at your bank details in the UK. And now they say, we want to control your car. Don't worry, it's for your own safety. Believe me, they're going to hit that number hard, that it's going to be for your own safety. Just before we went to the break, we were talking about Obamacare, affordable care, that has gone up 12% in just 3 years, according to the CBO's estimates. And of course, the liberal media is goobering the data, looking at a very short section of that, not 10 years, but looking at 4 years and saying, no, it's going to go down 20%. Well, it's going to go down 20% because they have pushed the cost farther out. But of course, we got Republicans who don't want to do anything about it either. One of them, of course, is not just Boehner, but we got Governor Kasich of Ohio. He says, if you oppose Obamacare, you're a bad Christian. This is something that comes from Campaign for Liberty. They point out that he's been going around the country stumping for a balanced budget. Can you feel the cognitive dissonance there? He's going around stumping for a balanced budget and Obamacare at the same time. Something that we now see from the Congressional Budget Office is going to add $2 trillion to the debt over a 10-year period. I mean, we're looking at a total debt that's about 17 trillion right now, 17, 18. So we're looking at a pretty big increase. That's about 1/9. That's about 11% increase just for that one program, just for only about half of the people who to get insured. And of course, these are going to be largely in the forms of subsidies. Well, hey, subsidized insurance is great, isn't it? Where's that money going to go, that subsidy? We've been saying from the very beginning, this is nothing but a massive transfer of wealth from the American people to the insurance companies. You're going to pay for that subsidy in taxes. And where is that money going to go? It's going to go to the insurance companies that write the checks for the Democrat and Republicans in office. Now, this is what Kasich is saying as he's going around talking about a balanced budget amendment. First thing he did to explain it was he said, well, hey, it's not going to cost Ohio any money. We're going to get that money for free. We're going to get it from the federal government. I guess they're just going to run the printing presses a little bit over time. But of course, we all know that eventually it's pretty easy to point out that that's going to have to be paid back with interest by us or by our children. So then he changes tack and he starts talking about the compassionate side of it. Washington said that government is not compassion, it's not eloquence, it's not persuasion, it's not any of those things. It's simply force. But he puts it out in terms of this is our Christian duty to provide Obamacare, government-provided health insurance, because it's not even health care, okay? It is health insurance. You're buying insurance and hoping that you're going to get health care. But just because you've got health insurance, as so many people have found out in this country, doesn't mean that you're going to get health care. But he says this. He says, well, I think I want to feed the hungry and I want to clothe the naked. And I have to tell you, I read a horrible story in the Wall Street Journal on the weekend about people, one man in particular, freezing to death over in Montana. And they've turned down about $500 million of help, I'm told, and that disturbs me. So, it's about helping your fellow man. But, God never said anything about practicing charity with other people's money. That's one of the first problems with this. And God never said that you need to go create a giant government bureaucracy to help people. Part of helping people is to make sure that you are doing it one-on-one. That's the real important thing, to step up and help people yourself. You can't depend on government agencies and bureaucracies to do that. They won't even allocate the money to them. They're going to keep more than half of the money for the bureaucracy. It's not even a good charity if you want to support that charity. But they can't tell who really needs it. And it's a faceless giving of money. It has nothing to do with being a good Christian. Stay with us. We're going to be right back with Paul Joseph Watson, and we're going to talk about making the trains run on time. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Alex Jones Show. I'm David Knight on this Thursday, January 29th, 2015. Joining me in this segment is Paul Joseph Watson from the UK. Before we go to that, I want to let you know that we have a special right now at Infowars.com. We have 2 X2 nascent iodines. If you buy 2 of those, you get 1 Ancient Defense for free. That's a savings of $20. If you get 2 of the Survival Shield, you get 1 of the Ancient Defense Herbal Immunity Formula free. That's our newest formula, Ancient Defense. It's selling out fast. We have a limited run, and so this will be a special that'll be ending soon due to supply. Again, get 2 X2 iodine, you get 1 Ancient Defense for free, a savings of $20. Paul, thanks for joining us. I wanted to talk to you before we go to this global control of transportation that we see developing. There's been a lot of stories this last week, and in the next hour, or the third hour, we're going to be talking to Rosa Corey about the Agenda 21 aspects of this, because this is a global issue, the crackdown on our movements, not just the tracking of our movements, but the control of our movements. But before we do that, you've got a story up today about George Soros, linking him to the Davos group, where they're essentially panicking over social unrest, but at the same time, they're fomenting it. We know that George Soros is pushing billboards that are trying to foment the unrest in Ferguson, and then they are also looking for their bug-out places in New Zealand and elsewhere.
Yeah, that's the theme, isn't it? That they know these revolutions, these uprisings are coming, and they want to hijack them, co-opt them towards their own ends, while having the insurance policy, as you said, of these secret hideaways, which Robert Johnson, this economist, revealed during the recent Davos Economic Forum, saying that people are basically buying huge tracts of lands in remote locations like New Zealand as a hedge against this instability which they see coming. But as we've reported for years, David, as long as 5 years ago, people were doing this. I mean, we had John Malone, the billionaire chairman of Liberty Media. He announced that he was buying a retreat on the Quebec border. We had James Cameron, the Hollywood director, in 2012, announced that he was moving his entire family out of America to New Zealand. We also had the Bush family buying 100,000 acres in Paraguay as far back as 2006. And in fact, I was told by a very prominent person who knows a lot of insiders around a year ago that the elite were buying huge tracts of lands, airstrips, etc., in South America. So this is a trend that's been going on for several years. In the recent article, and in an article that's coming out in about an hour or so, I pick it up from the point where Zbigniew Brzezinski gave this big CFR speech back in 2010, and he followed it up with similar comments in 2012, where the elite know that this, quote, global political awakening, those are his words, global political awakening, is coming, and that it poses a direct threat to the elite's bid to centralize power. And you were talking just then about the control grid. Zbigniew Brzezinski wrote the America's Role in the Technotronic Era, this book in 1970, in which he heralded the arrival of this control grid under which everybody would be under mass surveillance. It's important to know that during this CFR speech in 2010, he was lamenting the fact that this political awakening, this uprising, posed a direct threat to that technotronic era. So this is something that the elite they've known that it's been coming for at least 5 to 10 years. We've now seen expressions of it in the 2011 London riots, of course, Ferguson, Missouri last year. So they're talking about wealth inequality. This is what it's arising out of, is this depression of wages in the Western world, where people, especially younger generations, are finding it increasingly harder to meet this consumer culture, to maintain this kind of lifestyle. Now that we've got, religion, family, social mobility on the decline, that's been replaced by this consumer culture, which, because of income inequality, younger generations are finding it increasingly harder to maintain. So that's why we're starting to see these riots, like the London riots in 2011. And of course, then we have the perceived widespread injustice, the complete collapse in confidence in political leadership, as well as police brutality, which led to the Ferguson, Missouri riots last year. So we've got all these factors colliding together. The elite see this as instigating riots and civil unrest. That's why they're buying these insurance policies. But as he said, this is where the involvement of Soros comes in, because they need to not only get ahead of that, but control and co-opt those riots, as they did with the Arab Spring, as they did in Ukraine.
Well, of course, they rushed to get the U.S. taxpayer to subsidize and insure their derivatives. One of the first things they did when they came back from the election. So they're very concerned about this whole system breaking down. But in terms of the long-term prognosis, of course, we know that with AI, with robotics coming into so many different areas, they're predicting massive unemployment, 45% unemployment by the early 2020s, according to some of the AI experts and economists who have looked at this. If you look at that kind of massive unemployment and displacement, that is something that is up to the level of the Great Depression or worse, and that is going to cause massive unrest. So, of course, they're kind of hedging their bets. I mean, and you talk about this, them seeing this coming. 10 years ago, yeah, they started making their moves. I went to New Zealand back in 1998 because I was reading Doug Casey and James Davidson, and they were talking about what was going to be coming down. At that time, I had the money to make the move. I went there and looked. It's a beautiful country, but I went there, and it made me homesick for America. I just have to fight this here. I can't go somewhere else and fight it.
Well, I mean, that's the point. I don't see this, David, as, the elite relinquishing power and, saying the stuff's going to hit the fan and we're going to have to get out of here. At the moment, it's an insurance policy, but if there is massive political unrest, which is born out of those factors that I mentioned, social alienation, the lack of community, increased corruption in government, and those declining wages, that income inequality, then they want, an insurance option, and that's what this is about. But in terms of the economic picture, a major factor, and this is what Brandon Smith wrote about in his article, which we posted, which is linked from my article today. The next economic downturn, the next financial collapse, in whatever form that may take, they're going to blame it on capitalism. This is the narrative that they're pushing at the IMF, at the ECB, that capitalism is the biggest threat to capitalism. And of course, what is the solution going to be? Well, surprise, surprise, it's going to be for them to centralize more power and create this economic world government. So now you have Mario Draghi, the ECB head, and Christine Lagarde of the IMF, both penning very similar editorials earlier this month saying that when this next economic downturn really hits, they're going to blame it on sovereign economies, and the solution will be what they call multilateralism, which is basically a world economic government, centralization of economic power into fewer hands, less autonomous control over economies by sovereign countries. So even though it was their regulation, their policies that caused the 2008 economic collapse in the first place, their solution is going to be more of the same, but also a completely revamped economic system, which is directly under their control. So again, they're using the same trick. We've also focused on the past, David, on these IMF riots in places like Argentina. They caused these riots by instigating social unrest in the first place, by manipulating economies. Then when it all crashes, they asset strip and seize control over national economies, get them into more debt, get them reliant on the IMF, on the World Bank. So they're a good couple of moves ahead of the game, but whether it comes in the next few years or not remains to be seen. I know that Martin Armstrong, who is somebody we feature quite regularly, he's predicting, and he's been very successful with his prior predictions. He predicted the 87 Black Monday crash as well as the 98 Russian financial collapse. He's predicting civil uprising within America before 2016 or in 2016. Again, as a result of this distrust in government, in leadership, which continues to hover at historical record lows. So that distrust combined with an economic downturn, again, both of those factors are the fault of the economic elite, will lead to more of these riots, which the elite will then try to exploit for their own purposes.
Well, of course, Paul, crony capitalism is not capitalism. It's really cronyism. It's been called graft. It's been called corruption. For crony capitalism to work, government is actually a tool of these elites who essentially gain control of the government, who take it captive. And I think one of the things that illustrates that better than anything else, that corporate control and capture of our government, of course, is the Trans-Pacific Partnership, something that I think is going to be rammed through by the Republicans and by Obama. We're seeing a lot of strong signals that that's going to happen. A perfect example of that, where you've got corporations, corporate lobbyists meeting in secret, and the government is not even allowed to know what's going to happen with that. They're not allowed to see the negotiations. They're not allowed to read the documents before they deliver it. Instead, they're going to hand deliver this thing and tell them to rubber stamp it. And of course, they will, Paul.
Yeah, I mean, that's the fundamental issue over and over again. These economists like Piketty, these socialists, continue to blame capitalism when we haven't had a true system of capitalism in the West for the best part of 50, 60 years. It just hasn't existed. It's crony capitalism, it's corporatism, it's the revolving door between government and corporations, it's favors for favors. So, you know, that's what causes the problems in the first place. And then they blame free market capitalism to justify these regulations that only squeeze the middle class and small businesses. So then as the middle class declines, this wealth inequality, this income gap only gets wider as a result of their solutions to the problem. And yet they're still out in the media, Lagarde and George Soros particularly, saying that this wealth inequality will cause major social upheaval. But their policies, their crony capitalist policies, are what's creating that problem in the first place.
And if you look at the Keystone Pipeline, I mean, regardless of what you think of the Keystone Pipeline, the Republicans have pushed this through 10 times now. They're trying to push it through the 10th time. Even when things hadn't changed, they didn't have a new Senate. They did it for the 9th time when they came back from the elections. The first thing they did once they got a Republican Senate was, of course, to push for the Trans-Pacific Partnership. If you look to see who's going to benefit from the Trans-Pacific Partnership, you'll know who owns the Republican Party lock, stock, and barrel. That's why they're not doing any of the stuff that they campaigned on. They're not stopping open immigration. They're not doing anything to defund Obamacare. They're not doing anything to investigate the illegal actions of Obama. No, they just want to deliver to their corporate masters. And from that standpoint, it doesn't even matter to know who the corporate masters are. It's just important that you know that these people are bought and sold. And the same thing is going on with the Trans-Pacific Partnership. But moving on to this other story, Paul, one of the ways perhaps that they won't have to go to their bug outs in New Zealand and elsewhere is if they can affect control of the population. And of course, one of those things is Agenda 21. We're going to be talking to Rosa Corey in the third hour. An important part of that is controlling our movement, controlling transportation. And we had some really harrowing news this week, of course, reminding us that that's really what's been going on at airports and the TSA, as well as in Europe. We had these headlines where bank details are going to have to be handed over before you can fly on a plane in Europe. And then the TSA wants to look at your social media posts. We learned that the DEA 6 years ago was saying that they were going to look at automobile license plates at gun shows so they could put those people in a database as suspects. That was the DEA. That wasn't even the ATF. That was the DEA. So we look at what they're trying to do. It's not really about making the trains run on time, Paul, is it? It's really more like a Nazi control device. It's not an efficiency issue. It's really about controlling transportation.
Yeah, it's about embedding this idea that you have to get state permission to do anything. And if you've been a naughty boy, if you made a negative social media post about the government, then maybe your right to mobility, to travel, will be revoked. We saw that with this new TSA program, which for the moment they're considering for their pre-check program. So it will be opt-in on that basis. Of course, the threat is that it then could be expanded to every flyer, which is not only will they analyze your social media posts before designating you as being not a security threat and able to fly, They'll also analyze your purchase history. So this, I mean, there was a dystopian British TV show where to travel you had to replay the last week of your entire life via a chip embedded in your head that has a LifeLog camera which shows the security authorities every moment of the past week of your life. So that's the ultimate end of this in the ultimate dystopian nightmare scenario. But for the moment, that's what they're proposing. We've already had incidents where people are traveling from Canada to the United States where the TSA knows their prescription drug record, says that they have depression and may be a threat to the other passengers. So people have been harassed, interrogated over that. So it's all about creating this culture of having to get permission from the state based on your behavior or your ideological or political viewpoints.
And if you think that that's science fiction, let's play this clip from back in about 2008 of a CNN reporter, Drew Griffin, who couldn't get on a plane. Let's play that clip.
Where are you going?
I'm going to Chicago this morning.
Don't think it can happen to you? It's happening to me.
You are on the watch list. A watch list?
So how did I get on this list? Well, the TSA is adamant it's not even me, even though it is me getting stopped at the airport.
So, you know, they've been keeping people from getting on airplanes. And, of course, the TSA is the Transportation Security Agency or whatever the SA. I mean, I've seen so many different acronyms that are more accurate than that. But they're concerned not with just air travel. They're concerned with all transportation. And let me tell you, think about it when you go to the airport. Are you concerned that they're not going to let you on a plane? Are you concerned enough that you will go through and let them put their hands on you, subject you to x-rays so that you can then be rewarded with plane travel? It is a very important tool for them to be able to control your transportation. And it basically put you under house arrest if they don't like who you are. I think this is a very dangerous thing, Paul, and it's something that people don't realize how pervasive this is going to be once the government starts controlling the cars electronically. What they're presuming to do is have Wi-Fi or some other wireless technology that is essentially going to track and control the cars. But of course, they tell us, don't worry, we're going to get rid of traffic jams for you, and it'll be so much safer. That's the way they're selling it. Welcome back to the Alex Jones Show. I'm David Knight, your host today, and I have Paul Joseph Watson joining me from the UK. We've been talking about not only the article that he's got today about George Soros, at the same time that in Davos they're talking about how they need to have a backup plan, essentially a hedging their bets that society isn't going to break down. At the same time, they're also fomenting unrest by putting billboards up to foment that kind of unrest in Ferguson. But we're also talking about how they may try to actually pull this back, certainly how the government is going to try to control our movement. It's going to go far beyond what we have seen up to this point at the airports. Of course, we've seen the Viper teams that have gone out on the roadways to harass people, to inspect them. We're going to have the government, however, remotely controlling your cars, deciding when you can travel, where you can travel, and they're going to be tracking you completely. A very, very harrowing thing to contemplate, Paul. One of the things when I look at this, and of course they're selling this as part of the Internet of Things, something that David Petraeus was talking about years ago, the fact that appliances in your house that are computerized can be used as a listening device for the CIA and others who are prone to do that sort of thing. But of course, it presents a lot of security issues, and I see people talking about the use of this in transportation mode. They say, well, the Internet of Things is not as secure as the Internet. And it's like, ooh, wait a minute. The Internet's not at all secure, and you're pushing something on me that has less security than that? What are your comments about that?
Well, the FTC came out this week and said that it was vulnerable to hackers. So even the US government admits that the Internet of Things is wide open for abuse. As he said, Petraeus, the former CIA director, hailed the Internet of Things as a transformational boon for clandestine tradecraft, which basically means spying on everybody. The problem, and this is why we need to educate young people on this, because the people who are children and teenagers now are going to be growing up in this world, they're going to be under this kind of system, is that they have no frame of reference. They didn't grow up in a society before the internet or before mass surveillance. So I've got friends in their early 20s who, for example, can't even remember dial-up internet. So they've literally got no frame of reference for how things were before. So they've been inoculated that this is how it's always been and this is completely normal. And then you had a speaker at Davos last week who got up on stage and said, quote, "People often behave better when they have the sense that their actions are being watched."
Yeah.
Invoking, O'Brien out of Orwell's 1984.
Absolutely.
So it's this whole idea that constant surveillance, constantly being watched is the norm, that it's always been the norm, and that to protest against it is futile. And this idea that young people are willing to trade privacy for convenience, which at the moment it seems that they are. And this is why we need to educate young people on the fact that it's not always been this way. The threat that this could pose in terms of hacking and shifting that balance of power over to the government where they're always being watched.
Very concerning, because I see the schools today as quite literally being a prison. I mean, I jokingly referred to it as that when I was in high school, because I felt so confined, so restricted by it, so regimented. But today they actually have metal detectors and police walking the halls, and they're getting quite rough with the students. This is the way that they're conditioning them to live. Julian Assange, in terms of talking about Barrett Brown's charges against him, he said social media has all of your friends wearing a wire. And the other part of that is that they're going to twist things that you say, take them out of context, and come after you. It's just a really Orwellian society that we're growing up, these kids are growing up in, Paul. Welcome back to the Alex Jones Show. I'm David Knight. We were just talking to Paul Joseph Watson from the UK. He's going to stay with us through this segment to finish up what we were talking about. Of course, Paul, it's very concerning to see the fact that these things, they're admitting that the Internet of Things that they're going to use for our transportation are not even as secure as our current internet. And so that brings up the issue of maliciousness. Governments can not only control when and where you travel, not only look at everything that you're doing, but of course they can get rid of you and make it look like an accident. And even if it isn't something malicious like that, anybody who has worked with a computer very much ought to be concerned about the fact that your car is under computer control. That was something that I would never be comfortable with the experiences that I've grown up with Microsoft, Google, the rest of these companies. When you talk about a computer crash, now you're talking about a physical crash. So I'm not going to be one of the people signing up to get into one of these cars. I'm going to have to hold a gun to my head to do that.
Yeah, and then even on a personal level, it came out that NSA employees were using the data that they had to spy on ex-lovers and friends and colleagues. I mean, we saw that in Nazi Germany with the Gestapo. They used it to get business advantages over people they despised and people who they were in competition with. So even beyond the level of government surveillance,
absolutely,
this could directly impact people's day-to-day lives.
There was just a story from Jonathan Turley. I was going to talk about this later, but since you brought it up, Alabama's first gay legislator declares that she will out adulterous colleagues who oppose same-sex marriage. She said, if you're going to oppose same-sex marriage on the basis of supporting the family, if I know that you are committing adultery, I'm going to go public with it. And he talks about it from the standpoint, well, this raises a lot of legal issues as to what they might be able to do to her. But I look at this as like, this is the way the government has been, the NSA and other people have been blackmailing people in government for quite a long time. We had a story just a couple of weeks ago about the disappearance of a Hollywood screenwriter and director, Gary DeVore, who was working on a story that he claimed, of course, the storyline was that the entire invasion of Panama was to go down there and to get sex tapes that they were blackmailing government officials with. And he was somebody who had some credibility in that area because he was intricately linked with the CIA as he was working in Hollywood. So yeah, going in and blackmailing people, especially our government officials, that's one of the reasons why we should all be so concerned about the NSA and the CIA's dragnet spying.
Yeah, because I mean, surveillance is not just a weapon to be used to track people, to chill free speech, to make them self-censor, to restrict their mobility. It's a political weapon. I mean, we've had many stories about lists of gun owners being published in newspapers. And, the flip side of that, where people who don't own guns also live. That's a boon for criminals. You've had a situation in Sweden where they've got lists of people who are anti-immigration in Sweden. And of course, that could be collected just off social media posts alone. Then newspaper editors and other political agitators have actually visited people's houses and harassed them because of their political opinions about immigration. So if you've got a total surveillance society where everything is open to data mining down to the minutiae of people's political opinions, not only does it make them more likely to self-censor, but it also makes it more likely for this surveillance, this information to be used as a political weapon to smear people, to castigate people, and to harass people.
Absolutely. We've seen it happen in the past, and as we see this gay legislator saying that she's going to out adulterous colleagues if they oppose same-sex marriage, a lot of people, including myself, believe that Justice Roberts was blackmailed when he handed out the opinion on Obamacare, because he wrote both the opposing and the winning decision, and he flip-flopped on that issue, and everybody was really scratching their head as to why he would go from opposing it as a mandate to supporting it and calling it a tax. And so a lot of people believe that there was maybe some blackmail going on at that point in time. Thank you so much for joining us, Paul Joseph Watson in the UK. And, of course, the stories, there's also another story that we were going to talk about we didn't get to that Paul has up. Obese model hailed as a good example for women. Stay with us. We're going to take your phone calls at 800-259-9231.
From the water table to our soils to the atmosphere itself, our world is becoming more and more toxic each and every day. But it's not just the air outside that's toxic. Indoor air has been shown to have 2 to 5 times higher concentrations of pollutants than even outdoor air. And most Americans spend 90% of their time inside using toxic chemicals within their homes. There are more than 42 million smokers in the United States. Well over 1,000 types of mold and mildew linked to numerous conditions. And don't forget the fact that 6 million Americans live with pets they're allergic to as well. When I began to research these statistics, it was clear to me it was time to start cleansing my lungs in order to combat the toxic environment that we cannot escape, but that we can fight back against. Made with organic and wild cultivated herbs and manufactured in the USA, the new InfoWars Life Lung Cleanse is here in a convenient spray bottle that can be brought with you throughout any toxic environment. Now available exclusively at InfoWarsLife.com or by calling toll-free 888-253-3139.